Hello everybody, my name is Shylo. Today I'm just going to do a story time. So for those of you who don't know, I'm one of the alters in the system. This story happened when we were about 6 years old. And the doctor's office called DCF on my mother. So I was out playing with my friends. Well, originally we had went to the doctor's office and it was time for me to get my checkup and visit. My mom picked me up from school. We went to the doctor's office, no big deal. And then we sat there like from 9 o'clock till like 1 o'clock and still hadn't seen a doctor. So I told my mom and I begged her and begged her and begged her till we went home because I was hungry and I was tired. So apparently the doctor's office decided that, I don't know, because they never told us the allegations or anything. But again, I was 6 and probably wasn't paying any attention. And I got home, I ate, laid down for a little while, waited for school to get out. And then I went out and I played with my friends. The way it was when I was growing up, you could hear when your guardian called you. So I heard my aunt call me. I'm not gonna name her name because she's not here anymore and we were never on good terms. And she called me and I went and there were 2 men standing there. 2 grown-ass adult men. And she was like, oh, you gotta go with them. This DCF, they coming to take you away. So I asked her, I said, why only me? Because at that time my mom had my little brother, and I asked her what they was gonna do with my little brother, and she said, oh, well, I don't want you, but I'm gonna keep the baby. That's something you don't tell to a 6-year-old. I don't care. That's very hurtful. So she told me to get in the car with them and go. Now my mom was not home. So I'm not gonna condone what my mom did with her life, but it was her life, and sometimes it's just hard to cope as an adult. It's just true. So my mom wasn't home at the time. So they put me in the car. And then we drove around just for a long time. Then, I wasn't feeling well. I guess it was the anxiety, the fact that your family member just told you, they don't want you. There was more she said, but I can't repeat that right now. And finally, I guess it was a seizure or something. And I remember going to the hospital, from the car, driving around with them to the hospital. And, it hadn't stopped. I was still like shaking and convulsing, and, they kept me there for like 2 days. And they realized it wasn't a seizure. It was actually Tourette syndrome manifesting. So they kind of administered like medication. I think it was something like Ritalin or something. And then they picked me back up. DCF picked me back up. The whole time while I was in the hospital and the doctor, they kept asking me, oh, how did you get this mark? How did you get this bruise? How did you get this? How did you get that? And I could truthfully tell you, I was one of the roughest 6-year-olds you could ever meet in your life. So none of the bruises and marks and anything came from my mom or my grandmother, because that's who I stayed with. I stayed with my mom, my grandmother, and my new little baby brother. So, they kept pointing at, like, I used to get mosquito bites, and I used to scratch them and scratch them and scratch them and scratch them until it became like a sore. Then I used to pick at the sore. Like my mom, she would put stuff on it, but I don't know, I would just still scratch them. So I had those little sores all over my legs or whatever. But they wasn't sores, they had healed, but they turned into like black marks. Anybody who's, I think in Florida, it's called Florida sores or whatever. So they kept saying, oh, did your mom put these marks on you? Did your mom do this? Did your mom do that? And I'm like, no. And they still took me anyway, saying, oh, I was covering for my mom. My mom wasn't abusive. She wasn't normal. And sometimes she could be aggressive. But she didn't just outright wail on you all of the time for no reason. Sometimes she would, but again, she had an addiction problem. So I'm not at all condoning it, but we need to understand that people have problems. Everybody has problems. And sometimes those problems manifest in aggressive and abusive ways because they can't deal with themselves. I mean, that's just how it is. But again, I'm going back to the story. I explained to them My mom didn't cause any of this. I did it. But, you know, a kid telling the truth is never enough for organizations like DCF and CPS and whatever other name they want to give themselves every time they get some allegation. It's never enough. So they decided to still drag on with the whole process and try to convince me that what my mom did by bringing me home from the doctor was wrong, instead of addressing the fact that you take a 6-year-old out of school for a doctor's appointment and have her sitting there almost 4 or 5 hours, and that was every time because my mom only could afford. My mom didn't have private insurance, so we had to go to the public clinic. And you don't have anything in there for a 6-year-old to do. The TV's not on anything a 6-year-old could watch. And yet you want to punish a parent because they can't sit there with the 6-year-old for 4 or 5 hours waiting. That makes no sense. And they asked me, oh, why did your mom take you from the hospital? Is she trying to hide something? And I was like, no, I was ready to go. I was hungry. And every time I would go to the hospital or to the doctor, I get to eat McDonald's. So no, I'm not going to wait 6-7 hours while your doctors do whatever the hell they want to do for me to go in there for 10 minutes. For them to see nothing wrong. For me to go eat. So after they took me and, you know, they put me in this like group home for little kids. Mind you, I'm 6, so it really didn't bother me to have other kids around, but I was homesick. I wanted to go home. I wanted to be with my mom. You know, I just got this new diagnosis that my body is not doing what it's supposed to do. It's not doing what I'm used to it doing. And nobody in this place consoles kids because they have 40, 50 of them stuck in one place. And like 10 staff people. The place was nice, but you just grouping together a whole bunch of kids with problems, and those kids with problems only manifest their problems the same way their parents manifested the problems. It's not helping them to be around other people they don't know when the only thing they know is aggression from some parents. So the only thing they can show other people is aggression. Y'all not getting it. That's not a proper functioning like way to live. So I'm there, and they kept having to switch my room because my roommates were verbally abusive and aggressive and disrespectful. And what I can say is my mom always told me to defend myself, even if it was against her. So I will fight back. And, you know, they didn't like it. They call me the aggressor, me the abuser. I didn't do anything. I was defending myself. So apparently my uncle, who I love dearly, was downtown raising every form of hell he could. So after a month, they had no proof, they had no nothing. And I finally got to go home. But when they sent me home, they didn't tell my mom about the diagnosis. They didn't send me home with anything, letting her know what had happened. So now my mom is trying to figure out and understand what I was going through, how a perfectly good child left home and came back so different, which caused my mom to go further into her addiction. Because, you know, it's hard to have something happen to your child and think that it's your fault, and have everybody in every court system everywhere constantly screaming, you did this, this is your fault. Now mind you, my mom had a drug addiction. No one tried to help my mother. No one tried to help her with her addiction. If anything, they would throw her in jail, let her out, throw her in jail, let her out. How is that helping you with an addiction? So, and 2 of the weeks out of the month or so that I was out the house, I was in the hospital. Because on top of the newfound Tourette syndrome, I had asthma and I couldn't breathe. So I barely, was able, with all the stress and all of that, to function. And my breathing that got so bad to where finally, at this place that's supposed to be watching out for me and making sure that everything's okay, they didn't even realize that I wasn't well until I just finally just wasn't able to even hold my body up anymore. And I went to the hospital. So again, they were kind of upset because they had to send somebody from the group home every 8 hours to sit with me at the hospital because I was in their care, which was a lot more stress and annoyance in my life, because I was used to my mom sitting in the hospital with me, talking to me. I was used to my family showing up, things of that nature. And, so anyway, I was used to being in the hospital with my mom and, having my grandmothers come visit me. And so it's like, they think they're doing something in the best regard of a child, which I understand. Some kids really need it, and those kids, you can see they really need it, but this was at a time when DCF only looked at the bad in an individual's life. Like, oh, you have 8 million clothes, but you have this pile of dirty clothes over here. So clearly you're not taking care of it because you have 8 million clothes, but you still have a pile of dirty clothes. So it's like, but to anybody else, if you look at it differently, it's like, oh, well, you do have one pile of dirty clothes over here. Even though it's a big pile, your kid still has unclean clothes, and there's still like 500 outfits over here. So clearly the child is not being neglected. They have clothes. It's just the family doesn't have the means to clean clothes. Not every family all of a sudden got a washer and dryer because they made washers and dryers. And in that time, my family used a metal tub and a scrub board. And like I said, I was really a rough kid, so my clothes only lasted like one wear. But that was okay because they weren't expensive. So yeah. And they looked at Dad. They were like, oh, she has dirty clothes. And okay, at some point they get washed and they get hung outside on the line because we don't have a dryer. But again, this was in a time where low income, no income, poor African American families was getting their children taken away because they didn't have the means. And it wasn't the best of times for poor populations. That's all I could say. And it was kind of like, instead of giving that money that you would give to all these facilities ran by DCF and all of those to the families that couldn't afford it, that were low income, things of that nature, you felt it was more prudent to take the child and put them in a facility and pay the facility for housing the child daily. There's no logic behind it. If a child could be safe at home, the child should be safe at home. So, long story short, I did go back home before my 7th birthday. Nothing had changed. My mom was still on drugs. She still wasn't doing well. We were still low income, but I was happy. Still living in poverty. Nothing changed. And people have that concept in their head that once DCF step into your life, everything changed. Nothing changed. Nothing. So it's like, what did you really do in my regard? So thank you everybody for listening to my story. And you know, like, subscribe, follow us over at Instagram, Creative Panda System. Same thing on Twitter, Creative Panda System. We are gonna have more story times, hopefully, and I hope it'll give you guys more background. I'm not sure whether I'm gonna be doing the story times or, you know, one of the other authors, but again, thank you for, you know, listening to my story. Bye. Okay, guys, so today we're going to be talking about how, as an extrovert, you can still maintain a mental aspect, a mentally clear aspect. The simple fact that many extroverts are having such a hard time with the lockdown is because they are so used to being in close quarters with individuals. Excuse me, I'm having crab and steamed spinach, and there's scallops in here and shrimp in here as well as calamari. Trying to do my best.